Well, I think we're down to, what, 3 more sleeps, however you want to cover it. Here we go, and we are into this final week of the sleepwalk. That is it's kind of like the Seinfeld campaign, right? It's not just about nothing, and we're going to figure out where everything's going to drop as of Thursday night. I'm going to say 9:30, pretty much all over. We'll see what's going on as far as the provincial election is concerned here in Ontario. I'm Dave Trafford. This is The Rit Race. It's the daily edition of On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast. And we are joined on this Monday, the 30th of May, by Keith Leslie. You hear and see him on CHTV, and he'll be all over their coverage on Thursday night. Sabrina Nanji here from the Queen's Park Observer. You're going to drop in on the folks at CBC, I gather.
Yep, that's right. Big night.
And you, what do you figure? You're going to be all said and done by maybe 9:45?
I hope so. I think it will be pretty early. That's just like how voting works in Ontario. But as you said, it's been a bit of a sleepwalk campaign, right? So I think this thing feels like it's been called already. But we did get voter numbers from Elections Ontario for the advanced polls, and it seems like more people are getting out, casting ballots. So things could change, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know how to measure that, the numbers in the advance polls, because even in the federal election, Keith, we thought, if you had a big number in the advance polls, that, looked badly for the incumbent government. So I'm not quite sure how you read these anymore.
Well, I think big numbers in the advance polls are still part of the COVID mandate that a lot of us just don't want to be in a room with everybody on the same day. So if we can get there where it's spaced out over a couple of weeks, I'm still comfortable with doing things that way. And I think a great many people are. So I think that's why we've seen big voter turnout in advance polls without necessarily being reflected in a much bigger turnout on election day itself or the overall turnout. We're looking, it was just under 60% last time, and the pollsters seem to be saying that it's looking around that same amount are going to intend to vote this time. Their intentions have not changed in the polls since the beginning of the campaign, apparently. Everyone seems to be just solidifying their positions, which is, I guess, in a sense why you mentioned it as sort of a sleepwalk campaign. No issue has broken out that other than, affordability and inflation, and no one's really laying that at the feet of Doug Ford. Certainly less so than they're laying at the feet of Justin Trudeau, and yet Ford's won an election campaign. So in the lack of that, it's as I've said before, it's becoming a referendum on Doug Ford and whether we want another 4 years of the Progressive Conservatives, and it seems we're absolutely headed that way. Although I'll notice the latest Ecos poll, and I've been concerned all along that people have been saying, the Tories are headed for 80-odd seats. They're going to get a bigger majority than they did last time, and I just think that's really premature at this point. I think a majority that they're going to get reelected seems pretty, or a government that they're going to get reelected seems pretty clear, but a minority is absolutely possible. And the latest Ecos poll has the PCs at 34%, the Liberals at 27%, and the NDP at 24%. Now, the Liberal vote isn't as efficient as the NDP, so the NDP will get more seats under that scenario, but 34% is nowhere near a majority for the Conservatives. They'll get reelected, but that's the latest one. So I know these polls, they vary, but right now, I think it's just premature, and it does people a disservice to say that the Ford's going to walk into a majority government on Thursday. No, the votes still count, and of course, we still don't know that whole, can the Greens double their seat count? Can they get that Parry Sound Muskoka? They seem to have a sizable lead over the Conservative candidate in that riding. So I think every vote's still going to count, and it's important. It almost sounds flippant when we say there's no real issue. There's a ton of issues, but the opposition parties haven't identified any single one that says we should vote for them. We should vote for you because you're offering this. So I think we're almost sleepwalking to a repeat of what we have, but I think the minority versus majority is still very much on the line.
Well, I guess in terms of there being issues or not being issues, and we've hammered away on this over the last number of weeks, Sabrina, is that the opposition has not been able to articulate it, but, we had the incident, was it in London, I guess, on the weekend at a Ford rally, and a couple of people, screaming, actually getting up on the stage and accusing the Tories of cutting health care. There's nothing really necessarily behind what they're saying factually, I suspect that pointed to a number of things that might have been delisted or something to that effect. But this screaming and yelling that because, if you're going to elect a Ford government, you're going to privatize healthcare. That in and of itself, clearly an issue among a certain constituency. They are being more vocal and angry about that than either of the opposition parties.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some fact-checking to be done here, I guess. Like, I think even the Liberals and the NDP for sure have been calling out, privatization creep in our healthcare system. But, the way Ontario has it now is, the private sector is roughly 30% of our healthcare system. So I think that, people are very angry. Obviously, there's like some anti-Ford, anti-conservative sentiment out there. And to Keith's point, it's not necessarily a slam dunk per the polls, but we kind of tend to get obsessed with polls in the media as observers, and so that's kind of where we're all looking. But you're right, the opposition parties have kind of failed to tap into some of that anti-Ford sentiment as much as they should. That could actually, give the Conservatives a good, decent run for their money on Thursday. I think that they've been rather all over the place. They haven't really been talking much about the pandemic. I know we're all going through COVID fatigue. There's, no one really wants to be talking about COVID, but, the Conservatives really don't like it when they're, pressed on their record on what happened in long-term care, especially. And so we kind of have the opposition parties seemingly talking about like conservative issues, like, the gas tax, affordability, which has emerged, I guess, as the top issue is what pollsters are telling us. But it's such a broad range of everything from like stuff at the grocery store to, being able to afford a house. So like, I think, the Conservatives the Liberals have been, a bit obsessed with chickens. I would also say like they kind of jumped the shark a little bit, putting out that dancing chicken mascot. Like that was just next levels of desperation. So I think, just look at that to see how maybe they're feeling in these last final days and, confident or not.
The thing that strikes me as odd, though, and I get that, the polls are relative and a snapshot of this, that, and the other thing, but if you took, I think it might have been the 308, was it their projections that were talking about the Liberals finishing third with, a handful of seats, maybe 16 seats, something like that. That really, I mean, we sort of mentioned this last week. It's almost as if this is a reset election to kind of, the sorbet election. That's that palate cleansing that we're going to get as a result of what comes out of this vote, because this allows us to reconfigure and refocus in terms of what we really need to do. But I don't see, if those results are clear and then the Tories win going away, I don't see how any opposition voice becomes effective at any time soon. I mean, the Tories are going to run the table here, Keith.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not a good time to be an opposition leader. And for Mr. Del Duca, I mean, if he comes in with, I would say, I mean, I'm guessing here, I don't know, but if he comes in with less than 18 or 20 seats, and one of them isn't Vaughan, he's done. Like, he's done on the spot. And we already know there's a group of New Democrats who are waiting till 1 minute past poll time to decide Andrea Horwath's fate. So, I mean, the PCs are looking really good at this point, certainly from their point of view. Not from everyone else's point of view, but from their point of view, this campaign is working for them. This hide the premier, low ball, show up at a rally, make a few remarks, duck out, no questions, maybe a protest or two. And I think that protester did highlight, and there's a lot of people trying to highlight online the things like, if you need blood work now, it's $85. It's not covered anymore. If you need a cancer check, something's $480. That was covered, like the previous round of cancer treatment for some people are saying they're now paying for it. So there's absolute issues to be had. The long-term care, the Sabrina mentioned, of course, I rail on that quite a bit. But the opposition parties were too busy fighting each other, it seems, to coalesce on a concerted attack on Ford and his government and their record on this. Even though, as Sabrina pointed out, they're really, really thin-skinned about their record during the pandemic. They're very sensitive to it, and they lash back, and that's what you want. If you want to show people what you think are Doug Ford's true colors, get under his skin, get him lashing back, and they have totally failed to do that. One little interesting development this weekend, and it's very much an inside baseball type thing, but it was still very, very telling. Ted McMeekin in Hamilton, who was a Liberal cabinet minister, he was a Liberal MPP for 18 years. He was a cabinet minister for both Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. came out and endorsed Monty McNaughton. As the Conservative said, Monty's a good man. He gets it. He needs to be reelected. And I appreciated this in the sense that I've been wanting to talk about Monty all along in this podcast throughout the campaign. I think he is the Conservatives' secret weapon for all these union deals. His dedication, or union endorsements rather, his dedication to the skills trade set, and he just walked it frontline social media campaign, I think bigger than any other cabinet minister, just saying, you don't need a university education. We have so many skilled trades here that are available. And he really, really sold it, and the unions really appreciated that. So I think to see a former Liberal cabinet minister come out and say, Monty McNaughton, who's not, by the way, running in any Hamilton riding where McMeekin has influences, he's just saying this man gets it, he deserves to be reelected. For a former Liberal cabinet minister to come out less than a week before voting day and endorse a Conservative cabinet minister, that's pretty telling.
Well, yeah, and I think the other side of it is this wave of union support for the Tories. And I get that they're all private sector unions, but the suggestion that there is this crack in the union solidarity generally, Sabrina, I think speaks volumes to the opposition's inability to hear what's going on out there. They're tone deaf in so many ways that Doug Ford's win, let's go way out on a limb and call it Doug Ford's win in this election, is just a complete and utter failure by the NDP and the Liberals. They have not waged a campaign against this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of Ontarians are thinking, well, here's Ford, and the other two are really not so compelling. And of course, that favors the status quo. But on unions, you're right. Like, I think even having private sector unions back the Conservatives was like a huge feat for them. Many in organized labor that have talked about, what the Conservatives say they're doing for workers, raising the minimum wage, more digital or more rights for digital app-based workers like Uber drivers, that kind of thing. They think it's low-hanging fruit, but like the NDP hasn't done enough to, I guess, earn them back. And the NDP has typically been, the party of organized labor. Like, unions have like a say in their own internal votes, like on leadership and on policies, that type of thing. So they are absolutely like just ingrained into this party. And then we have, ousted MPP Paul Miller over in Hamilton East Stony Creek, who's now running as an independent, after getting kind of unceremoniously booted from his party, saying the NDP is no longer the party of organized labor. Like, take that with a grain of salt, because Miller was, of course, kicked out and is now basically suing the NDP and Horwath over that whole debacle there. But it says something about the Conservatives to be able to get that. And this is all part of Doug Ford 2.0, that he's learned his lessons through the pandemic. This is part of why, his very tightly controlled campaign war room is not putting him out, more longer than he needs to be out there, more chances for him to put his foot in his mouth, let's say, which, Ford has done in the past. So this has been like a pretty well-run campaign from the Conservatives, like if you're looking at it that way. And it kind of just forces the opposition parties, rather than to, offer something innovative and new to voters, they're kind of just playing defense. And to Keith's point, they're also, battling each other big time. The Liberals are now, promoting the message of strategic voting. I think even the Star endorsed strategic voting here too. And I think, that anecdotally, voters that I talk to, they don't really like that. Of course, there are those staunch anti-Ford, anti-conservative voters who just want to take Doug Ford down. And that's the line we're hearing from the opposition parties. But that's kind of like an opposition play. It's not a play that you make if you want to form government. And so I think for both Del Duca and Horwath, especially if Del Duca doesn't win his seat in Vaughan Woodbridge, and especially if he also doesn't form official opposition, like, people are going to be taking a much harder look. They're already starting, from what I'm hearing, at his leadership, at his future there. And of course, Horwath, we've said many times, it's her fourth kick at the can. We've got the 901 Club, sharpening their knives, getting ready for Thursday night. This could be a reset for those parties. And I guess, we've got, depending on if there's a majority or minority with the Conservatives, it could be another 4 years until we get, someone to actually rally behind, an exciting leader. Those
unions, this change with the unions, that has put Windsor in play. right? Where's Ford going tonight after he's going to Ottawa today for the first time in months, since before the occupation by the truckers, let alone the storm? But he's going to end up at a rally in Windsor tonight. Taras Nadeshak is not running again, the NDP, who would have been the NDP incumbent. That riding, those jobs, that the EV plants and the production that Ford has announced down there, and the union endorsements, they're going to pick up one of those Windsor ridings.
Yeah. I would just add,
and from the NDP. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, like even 338 Canada, the polling that they've analyzed as that, the Southwest region is the PCs are coming out on top there. And I thought it was very telling, as Keith mentioned, that Andrea was in Essex, because their strategy up until, these final days has been to go after PC ridings they didn't have in 2018. And now we kind of see Andrea touring around the spots that she did gain, and Windsor has long been, NDP. So it does kind of seem like the strategy here, if you're reading between the lines, that maybe they're sweating Windsor. And the Conservatives, meanwhile, Ford's been there a few times. They've got, billions coming from both the feds and the province in terms of auto investments. And they had their candidates nominated months before any other candidate. So these guys have been like pounding the pavement, door knocking. So yeah, I mean, to Keith's point, that's definitely going to be an area that I'll be watching on Thursday night.
Well, and the other side of that is noticing that Schreiner is up in Parry Sound, Muskoka. So it kind of is, you're starting to see that bow be, pulled tightly, I think. I think that might just be the fun story of the night on Thursday.
Oh, absolutely. I'm certainly looking forward to watching that riding very closely. But it makes you wonder why the New Democrats in their campaign, I know it's always good to wade into, the government or opposition party territory and, try and make a bit of a claim or stake your thing as you're driving by to a riding you already hold. But when you hold 40, going in, a record high 40, and you don't have a plan to defend every single last one of them before you start going off into the other ones, that strikes me as a real missed opportunity or just a bad plan to begin with. A lot of those 40 you knew were picked up because of the Liberal vote collapse. So you would have to have strategic plans to get them. Throwing out your MPP in Hamilton East, Stony Creek, a few weeks before the campaign, not a good strategy, because he's running as an independent, Paul Miller, as we just talked about. So if whatever happens in that riding, the NDP vote is already split now between their new candidate and Mr. Miller, and whatever else is going on. People are probably that's another seat in a Labour city. The NDP could lose this time. It strikes me that you had 40 seats, and most of the predictions going in from the pundits were that you'd be lucky if you could hold on to those 40. It's not likely to repeat. Wouldn't that be your plan? But no, as you mentioned, we saw her all over the place in some PC ridings and some ridings where they were third place, not just second, third. That doesn't strike me as very... No, she also had her campaign derailed by COVID herself, and then, having to quarantine from COVID. And then I gather her northern tour on late last week was sidelined by an airplane trouble, and she had to do her thing from Zooming from an airport lounge. So these things don't help either. But the plan overall seems that those initial 40, that should have been your bulwark. You should have been just defending that before broadening out into areas where you had zero or little chance.
Well, I think you use the phrase plan advisedly in this case. Just in terms of, if we're going to call that a plan,
well, it's her fourth one. You can't, a lot of times, like a Del Duca or someone like that can say, geez, I just went where they told me to go. I did what they did, because he doesn't have the infrastructure. He doesn't control all the party. This is her fourth campaign as leader. If anything happened in other campaigns that she didn't have control over, she would have control over it by now. If there was anything she felt was lacking in previous ones or should have been dealt with, this was all on her. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I view it. The other leader's brand new. Ford clearly is doing what they're telling him to do. You can tell he's biting his tongue at times. In his exchange with Sean O'Shea from Global News, thank you so much for asking that question. It's like he could barely spit the words out. He wouldn't answer the question. But we could see it there. This, as I say, Ford's doing what he's being told to do. I assume Del Duca had some input, but let's face it, he doesn't control the whole of the Liberal Party yet. He hasn't had time to gather that. Her situation is completely different. So if there's a plan that was, or a lack of one, that's to be blamed for their situation, clearly it's on Ms. Horwath.
Yeah, there's no question, and I think that will be resolved fairly quickly in terms of how the party responds to that. Okay, well, let's leave it at that. Just as I said, 3 more sleeps till Election Day. And all Twitter and excited about that. Keith, Leslie, Sabrina, and Angie, I'm Dave Trafford. This is The Rit Race, the daily edition of On the Ledge. It's Eye Contact production.